Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you in the p5.js editor how I created this sample choose your own adventure castle story. And I'm just going to walk through this a little bit and talk to you about the logic and a little bit about the code so that you have an idea of one way to approach this. This video is if you are already familiar with JavaScript and P5 and you're thinking about how to approach this. If you haven't done any P5 JavaScript before, this is probably going to be a little confusing because there might be a lot of information, but it might be worth watching anyway. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I create some global variables that I'm going to be using throughout my program, and those are these here. Anything that begins with a BT is going to be a button. So I use these variables to kind of create the button object and what it's going to do. This variable, the scene, keeps track of the number of scene that I'm in, and I just number them 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I use that number in the switch case, the switch statement that I use below. And these variables that begin with txt are the actual text that I'm using to display kind of in that scene. In my setup function, I do a create canvas. I set a frame rate that's really low. And this was, if I was going to do some animations, I probably wanted it to be pretty slow. And also, I was just kind of messing around a little bit with what frame rate I needed to make this so that it looked okay. You can make this probably really low if you want to. And the background by default is 100. Now, I've decided that the default font is not really a font that I wanted to use, so I am actually creating another font. To use any other font, you actually need to include the font definition. So if I take a look over here, if I open up this triangle that shows me my project folder, which has my index.html and my style.css and my sketch. I'm looking at the sketch. So if I look at index, this right here, I actually just grabbed a Google font, and this reference right here is actually pulling the font definition from Google Fonts. So I have to make sure that this is in my HTML file and loads so that I can use it here in my sketch. So that's what that is. I set the scene variable to 0 because that is the beginning. That's the start of my story. And then I define all of my buttons. Each variable has a create button with the text that is going to appear on the button. I set the position of the button, and then I set what is going to happen when you click with the mouse on it. And so I just put in the name of a function, and each function represents a scene. So I'm just going to scroll down here really quick to show you what that looks like. So here's my startup function. So basically when the scene equals 0, it's this. When the scene equals 1, it runs this function. It also kind of keeps me set to that number. So each scene is its own function, and I call the function by clicking on a button. So this is the walk on, and then I hide the button. I hide all of the buttons at the beginning so I don't have any stray buttons running around. So I define all of my buttons, and then I make all of my text. This is the text that's going to be in the first scene. This is the text that's going to be in the second scene. And I just put all of the text on one line because I figured that would be a little easier to keep track of. So I put those all in variables. And then my draw function is really just this switch statement. So, and the way switch statements work, it's like a if statement. The reason you would use a switch statement over an if statement is if you have a lot of cases, if you have a lot of things that you're going to be checking, this is a little more efficient and it's a little easier to look at because otherwise you'd be doing if and then else if, else if, else if. And that's fine 2 or 3 times, but if you have, I have only 5, but I could probably have like 30. So that would get really confusing to look at as an if statement. But that's all that my draw is. So, and because I want it to be continually running, I make sure that, so what happens is I click on a button and say it sets the scene to 1. So it runs that function, which is this, and then this also kind of like makes sure that every time the function runs, I keep the scene at 1, and then I run the function over and over again. Otherwise, it wouldn't respond to user input. I need to make sure that all of this is in the draw function, which is continuously running. So the logic is kind of like the button starts the function, and then the function keeps running itself until another button is pressed, is the way that kind of works. And I did that because I thought that would be a fairly efficient way of approaching this. And again, this is by no means the only way to do this. There's a variety of ways you could tackle this. Okay, and then I have the different functions. And in each function, I set a background so that when I am in a different scene, it's a different colored background. I decide which buttons I want to show, and I might need to hide other buttons that were there previously. I also set a fill, which is going to be the text color, the text size, and which text to show. So, and I do that in variables because I thought that would be kind of a better way to organize it rather than having all of the text out here. And also, this text block here really only requires 3 arguments, the text itself, and then the XY location. But then you can specify like an X2 and a Y2 number, and these actually represent kind of a text box that will force wrapping. So that's why this, I don't have to worry about placing each line of text, because otherwise you'd have to give each text its own XY value. But in this case, I just put a long string of text and I give it like a bounding box, and it kind of keeps itself wrapped within that box. So I have different scenes for that run when a certain button is pressed. And that is basically it for this.